So let's just jump right in. What if I told you there might be a massive treasure trove of critical metals hiding in plain sight right inside the European Union? Could this be the key to unlocking Europe's green future? Well, that's what we're here to explore.
Think about it for a second. That phone in your hand, the electric car you might be eyeing up, pretty much our entire modern world, and especially the big push towards a green economy, it all runs on metals. And we're talking about absolutely massive amounts of copper and gold here. Okay, so that immediately begs a huge question, right? Especially for Europe. If you're going to need that much raw material to power your economy and hit your climate goals, where on earth does it all come from?
And that question, well, it leads us straight into Europe's big dilemma right now. The continent is facing this enormous challenge: how to get its hands on the very materials it desperately needs to become self-reliant.
Just look at the numbers for copper. It's the metal that's essential for basically everything electric. The stats pretty much tell the whole story. The EU gobbles up about 16% of the world's supply, but it only produces around 5%. That huge gap, it means one thing, and one thing only: dependency.
And believe me, that dependency is a huge risk. See, powering the green transition isn't just some abstract concept. We're talking about actually building millions of EVs, wind turbines, and solar panels. And every single one of them needs a secure, steady supply of copper that right now, Europe just doesn't have.
So what's the game plan? Well, the EU has come up with one. It's called the Critical Raw Materials Act. And the goal is pretty ambitious, but it's crystal clear. They want to seriously boost domestic production. The target is that by 2030, at least 10% of all the critical stuff they use, like copper, has to be mined right there in Europe.
Okay, but how does a big continent-wide policy like that actually become a reality on the ground? Well, we can see one potential answer taking shape in west-central Romania. There's a site there that could be a massive piece of this puzzle. It's called the Rovina Valley Project.
This whole project is being spearheaded by a company called Sun Mining, and it's smack in the middle of a historic mining district. Now, according to all their assessments, this isn't just any old deposit. We're talking about one of the largest undeveloped copper and gold projects in all of Europe. The scale of this thing is, well, it's staggering.
Just listen to these numbers. The company's confirmed resources are pointing to 7 million ounces of gold.
An incredible 1.4 billion pounds of copper.
And get this, a projected mine life of around 17 years, and that's just for the first phase. So, to put it simply, this is a massive, long-term operation we're looking at. But of course, a project of this size immediately brings up a huge, critical question. It's really the one that sits at the very heart of this entire story. Can you really power a green transition with an industry that's got, let's just say, a very difficult environmental history?
Yeah, let's just be direct about it, shall we? Mining has a bad reputation for a reason. So, the most important question for a project like Rovina isn't just, hey, how much gold and copper is in the ground? It's, okay, so how exactly are you planning to get it out?
So, how does Sun say they're going to do things differently? Well, their whole plan is to ditch the old-school methods. Things like cyanide processing and these super risky wet tailings dams. Instead, they're proposing a cyanide-free flotation process and a much safer technology called dry stack tailings.
All right, so what in the world are dry stack tailings? Well, instead of storing mining waste as this liquid sludge behind a giant dam, which sounds risky, because it is, the material is first dewatered, so you get this dense, kind of paste-like substance. Then it's compacted in a properly lined facility. The big argument from the company is that this method uses way less water. And, most critically, it massively reduces the risk of one of those catastrophic dam failures.
Of course, beyond all the geology and the cool engineering, there's another whole story here, and that's the financial one. You better believe this project is being pitched to the market as a major investment opportunity.
So let's break down these investor metrics, because they can look a little complicated. They're really just two different ways of asking the same basic question. How much is the company worth compared to all that treasure it has in the ground? And when you look at the numbers, the difference is, well, it's pretty stark. Sun is basically arguing that compared to its peers, the market is valuing their massive asset at just a tiny fraction of the going rate.
So if you boil it all down to a single sentence, this is the investment pitch. You have a huge, strategically vital resource for the EU's biggest goals. It's located in a stable EU country, and according to the company, it's just deeply undervalued by the market right now.
All right, so let's zoom back out. What does a project like this really mean for the bigger picture?
Could this be the new blueprint for how Europe goes about securing its own resources for the future?
Look, the stakes here are incredibly high. We know for a fact the EU needs its own supply of these critical metals, but we also know that any project on home soil is going to face intense environmental and social scrutiny. And that's the real tension, right? If a project like Rovina can somehow thread that needle, prove it can be both profitable and responsible, it could totally pave the way for more made-in-Europe resources. But if it fails, well, Europe might have no choice but to keep relying on those same old, unstable global supply chains.
And it's so important to remember, this isn't just about charts and policies and numbers on a page. This is about real places, real landscapes, and the very real communities who call that place home.
Which leaves us with one final big question. Projects like the Rovina Valley are being presented as a clear-cut answer to Europe's huge strategic problem. But is this really the blueprint for a new era of resource independence? Or is it just the beginning of a whole new and very complex set of environmental, social, and political challenges right in Europe's own backyard?